I can see that.
Okay. All right. So let's start recording, Paul, and
Yep, we're recording.
and then we'll get started, and I'll tell you, I'll give you a countdown, Taryn, because I'm going to start a clock thing.
Okay.
Sorry for the pressure.
No pressure whatsoever.
No, none. You should get bravery points, actually.
Yeah.
For going first. Okay. Right, Paul, are you recording?
I'm recording.
Okay, Taryn, when you are ready, you can take it away. Thanks, heaps.
Okay. Well, I'll be talking to you about the determinants of adult coronary artery disease in Colombo, Sri Lanka. So Colombo is the capital of Sri Lanka and also the largest city within Sri Lanka. It's experienced rapid unplanned urbanization over a relatively short period of time. And what's come with that is obviously complications health-wise, like we have in the Western countries, which is namely NCDs. The most prevalent one is coronary artery disease, and it's the most common cause of death in Sri Lanka. So the distal determinants of coronary artery disease are the environment. You have 1 million people commuting into the city every day, and it's put a big strain on transport and infrastructure. So the government have obviously built more roads, but it's been at the expense of safe, active transport areas as well as recreational areas. Socioculturally, Asians tend to generally handle more stress when it comes to social responsibility, status, and discrimination. But what they found in Colombo as well, because it's a concentrated city, the contrast of rich and poor more, so they're feeling the stress even more. Economically, healthcare, all residents in Sri Lanka have healthcare which is free, but there's only one large hospital in Colombo that treats coronary artery disease, so it puts a big strain on the waiting list. Also, there was a civil war a while back, and the hospitals in the north and east are still not completely repaired. So a lot of people come into Colombo for treatment, again, adding to the wait list. There is private healthcare, but what they do is they deal more with curative rather than preventative, so it doesn't actually ease the burden of waiting lists either. Medial determinants of coronary artery disease are occupation. Obviously, as it's urbanized, the city's urbanized, the more active jobs have been pushed out rurally, and the more sedentary jobs, office jobs, have become more predominant. Also, with the competition and the quick expand, job security is quite low, so people are quite stressed with that as well. Generally, stress that was seen within Colombo was for people who are under 40 years old, having a higher social status, accumulated debt from living in a larger city, and also having to work longer hours. And the proximal determinants have been physical inactivity. So it's seen in females and males, more predominant in females. Overnutrition was another proximal determinant where the recommended daily starch intake and salt intake has exceeded, and also they're not getting their 5 fruit and vegetable. Smoking could also be seen in 29.2% of the population, which is a risk for coronary artery disease, as well as alcohol, hazardous drinking amounts. So what you could see is with abdominal obesity, which is related to drinking up to 4 to 9 portions a week, it also leads to an increase in abdominal obesity, which is directly related as a risk to coronary artery disease. And finally, noise pollution. Noise pollution has increased, obviously, with the change in infrastructure, and it's been recorded as being out of recommended amounts and is an increased risk for coronary artery disease as well.
Well done, Taryn.
Ooh,
Taryn,
yes.
Just what do you see as the link between noise pollution and coronary artery disease? I see you've referenced it as a factor, but what's the etiology of that?
So it's more down to the stress of it, just that consistent noise throughout the day. There's no let up of it, so they say it's actually increasing the stress levels
and probably
leading to blood pressure. Yeah, disturbing sleep and blood pressure as well.
Yeah, excellent.
So what I found really interesting was the population in the day in Colombo is 3 times the population at night. That's how many people commute into there every day. Yeah,
which means that there's traffic jams all the time.
Yep.
And Taryn, you just need to put a note on the bottom. For references, see page 2 or see something like that.
Oh, sure. Yep. Okay. Done.
Excellent.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Taryn. Anyone else got a quick question for Taryn before we move on to the next person? Is that your family of origin, Taryn? Is there
Yeah.
people there that you know? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my heritage is Sri Lankan. Most of us have gotten out during the Civil War. My grandparents and all left. But yeah, that's my heritage.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, I will stop sharing now. There we go.
Anyone else got a quick question for Taryn? No? All right. Hi, Christabel. I'm just checking in with Christabel. You're right to share live with us when your turn comes, Christabel.
Lost you guys. Hold on.
Yeah, just on mute. Okay. Anyone lip read? No. We'll just get you to see if you can find your mute button. There you go.
Because I know I'm the last.
Yes, you are the last. All I was just checking was that you're happy to do it live because I hadn't got your video, so that's okay. You're fine. Okay, no worries at all. Okay.
So,
well,
Christabel, are you actually in San Francisco or are you just dreaming?
Dreaming.
Good
We would like to go there.
Excellent, ladies. Well, give me just a moment. I am going to share screen and we're going to share Rosanna's. Feel free to give us the title, Rosanna, while I share screen and get myself sorted out.
Sure. So I looked at the prevalence of cancer amidst the Indigenous population, particularly in Queensland, but there's a bit of overlap with general Indigenous Australians as well. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Can everyone see my black screen now?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Well, let's start.
Hi everyone, my name is Rosanna Laredo and I've been looking at the prevalence of cancer in Queensland's Indigenous population. If we look at 2014 alone, about 6 years ago, there are nearly 700 Indigenous Queenslanders who passed away. And of those, there were 34 who died of lung cancer specifically. And that was nearly twice as many as those who died of lung cancer who were not Indigenous in Australia. Later, a study was done with about 65 Indigenous healthcare workers and community members. About half of them admitted that they knew very little about lung cancer. And even more concerning, that all of the healthcare workers, 100%, admitted that they did not know how to deal with or how to help someone who was suspected of having lung cancer. And it's not just lung cancer that we're looking at, but other cancers too. Many of you would assume, as I have as well, that tobacco is the major cause of lung cancer, and that's certainly on the money. But tobacco also causes a number of other cancers in other areas of the body, and tobacco is one of the major proximal determinants that we're looking at here. We also look at risky levels of alcohol consumption, obesity, poor nutrition, lack of physical activity. All of those are proximal determinants in causing the cancer here. And one of the latest National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health surveys tells us that 40% of adults are still smoking daily in the Indigenous population. Moving to the medial determinants, the major medial determinant we look at is racism. Poor housing is also another one, living in remote areas, marginalisation from the dominant culture. And these things, particularly racism, lead to other determinants like anxiety, depression, asthma, physical illness, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and they start to overlap these determinants. And then those, of course, will lead to tobacco use and marijuana use and other things. And the distal determinants, we're looking mainly at lack of education, lower rates of employment are the two major ones, but equally as major is poor access to health in Queensland. As you can see in this picture over here, that there are only a few centres that are Indigenous friendly cancer support services in Queensland, and so that's going to make it difficult for the Indigenous to reach somewhere to be screened. And on top of that, Indigenous Australians are less likely to participate in different screening programs, and so therefore, if they're not diagnosed, they don't know how to fix it, and so the mortality rates are going to be high. But the good news is support from family, community, church groups, etc., is going to be helpful in this situation in reducing cancer in Queensland's Indigenous population. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rosanna.
Thanks.
I'll stop share. Brilliant. Any questions for Rosanna?
Yeah, Rosanna, I was interested there. You had the statistic that 1/3 of Indigenous population had experienced racial prejudice at some stage. I would have thought it would have been a lot higher than that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's less who. I mean, there might be more, but haven't admitted suffering, or hadn't thought of it at the time, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've got my daughter's fiance is Australian born, but of Chinese origin.
Okay.
And my daughter's been walking through a mall holding hands with him and been abused by strangers. You know, it's just.
Wow. It's ridiculous.
It is. It's yeah.
It doesn't make sense. No, it's sad.
Anyone else with a question? No? Well, thank you, Rosanna. That one went smoothly enough. So what we'll do is we'll get Neroli to share screen, and Neroli's going to present live tonight. So you're right, Neroli, look for that green button.
Yes, here we go. Somehow it's gone on to other things. Let me just start our slideshow. Okay.
Hang on. The slideshow's not working on ours yet.
No, let me just get the slideshow going. There we go. Is that coming up now for everybody?
Yeah, good.
Yep. Okay.
Good.
All right. Whenever you are ready, Neroli.
Okay. My husband and I are country living and working in a remote Indigenous community on an island off the coast of Queensland in Townsville. He's a teacher at the local high school and I'm a physiotherapist. In the just over a year that we've been here, we've become aware of the high level of mental health distress and suicides in this community. And so I chose to research mental health issues in remote Indigenous communities. About 20% of Indigenous Australians live in remote areas or very remote areas compared to only about 2% of non-Indigenous people. 29% of Indigenous people self-report mental health issues. Hospitalisation rates for mental health, suicides, suicide ideation and self-harm levels are higher in this population than the general population. For each documented cause of poor mental health in remote Indigenous communities, I tried to follow them both distally and proximally to get the fuller picture. The relationship between proximal, medial and distal determinants becomes a complex web of cause and effect, with determinants interacting on the same level and across levels of determinants. Some proximal determinants are alcohol and substance abuse, poor diet, poor literacy including health literacy and medication compliance, low income, poor attendance at appointments, incarceration, family violence and psychological distress. And some of these interact with each other. For instance, psychological distress can cause increased drinking and substance abuse, which can contribute to family violence and thus incarceration rates. Some of the medial determinants include low socioeconomic status with high levels of underemployment or unemployment and welfare dependency, poor educational attendance, engagement and outcomes of education, high numbers of suicides and attempts with normalisation and acceptance of the poor mental health and also acceptance of incarceration, difficulty and reluctance to attend medical appointments, high levels of chronic disease and low life expectancy, overcrowded housing and intergenerational trauma with a loss of male role models, particularly with incarceration, and decreased use of their local bush tucker, and also some gambling addictions feed into those as well. When I looked at distal determinants, I found things such as racial discrimination with the historical loss of land, culture and language, the loss of traditional family and social structure and the impact of the stolen generation, with 50% of people reporting being affected personally or in their family by the stolen generation. Previous institutional control with disempowerment and decreased resilience, a lack of culturally appropriate interventions with a white bias and inadequate numbers of Indigenous health and education workers, particularly those with higher qualifications. There's insufficient research into Indigenous mental health, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Remote locality leads to costly food transport and high cost of nutritious food, and also a difficulty in getting and keeping qualified teachers and medical personnel. And now we're adding the impact of climate change to fragile environments. As a clinician, I've been reminded of the need to continue working with the individual whilst being aware of and trying to impact the societal factors that influence the patterns of disease and disability, and to look deeper than the obvious causes to the more distal determinants.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Nerily. That was impressive. Now, you're going to have to put that together on a poster by Sunday.
The front one is a poster. So the first one, that one is the poster.
Okay, excellent. Good one. Excellent.
And I just focused in on the others so you could see them, because it becomes so small when it's
to put up on the screen. Yep.
Yeah.
What's in the distal determinants? You got welfare colonialism. Do you know a little bit more what that means?
So I think it's basically meaning, and that term was used within the research, but it's looking at, we have colonised the country with non-Indigenous people, and then as a result of that, a large proportion of the Indigenous communities are now dependent on welfare to survive.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, self-determination is a critical factor in flourishing or good health.
Yeah, and when you've come fairly recently from situations where you're under institutional control and you don't get to make any decisions, bells would ring here on the island for you to go to a meal or to go to work or to go to bed.
That's right.
No self-determination.
That's right. And I mean, we saw an example a couple of years ago now where with the child sexual abuse in the Northern Territory, they just sort of sent the army in and sort of, completely took over. Which, if they tried to do that in a white society, there'd be chaos.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can't stop my screen sharing. Hang on.
Any other questions for Nerily by anyone that's it. Feel free to talk among yourselves. And any other questions at all? Okay, just give me a moment. Is Matt's not here, is he?
Matt's not here, no.
No. Okay, well, we'll come back to him if
he shows up.
He makes that, and we'll go on to Kelly. So just give me a minute while I share screen, and we're going to share Kelly Parker's. We've got two Kellys. So Kelly Parker, give us a wave. Okay, just give me a moment.
Just going to say, Nerily, is there an ACO, like an Aboriginal community controlled health organisation where you are?
They're actually working towards that. So at the moment on the island here, there's sort of two separate lots of health services. One is under the Queensland government, and the other part of it is actually under the Palm Island Community Corporation. They're in the process of working towards amalgamating those and having the health service side of things totally community controlled, but there is also a small hospital on the island that will remain under Queensland Health Control.
Cool, yeah. Because where I am, we have the hospital, we have a community health service, and then I work for the community controlled health service.
Okay,
so
that will eventually come.
Yeah. That's cool.
Okay, just give me a minute. Kelly's has disappeared on me. I'm just finding it again. Oh, sorry, Kel.
You're almost there, Mel, but it disappeared.
Am I still sharing screen?
No.
I thought so. No, just give me a second. Okay. Right, can you see that, everybody?
Yep.
All right, let's go with Kelly's.
Past, present and future.
Hang on, let's start again. Here we go.
Past, present and future. Who are the traditional custodians of the land I present on tonight and present about respectively? I looked at the determinants of the high incidence of tobacco use in the remote Aboriginal community called Yakanara, with a population of around 100 people. The map in the background of this poster depicts the language groups of the Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, and you might be able to see in the centre I have highlighted where Yakanara is located on Walmajati country. Some people argue that smoking forms part of Indigenous Australian culture. However, it is well documented that cigarette smoking was only introduced to Australia in the last 200 years. Starting off with the distal determinants, it was obvious to look at the great loss of culture experienced by Indigenous Australians between 1880 and 1920 in this region. During this time, pastoralists were concerned about gaining a constant and cheap labour force, and as they turned to the Indigenous population here to fulfil these requirements, it marked the beginning of the transition of this population from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a more immobile life on cattle stations. According to the 1905 Royal Commission on the Condition of Natives, pastoralists added tobacco to ration packs as a means to control and entice Aboriginal people to live closer to stations. This identifies the role tobacco played in establishing a perpetual cycle of diminished desire to move away from station camps and an attenuation of traditional practices. Today, despite smoking prevalence declining among all Australians, there remains an increasing trend for Indigenous Australians living in remote areas. Looking at medial determinants, the social disadvantage of this community augments social inequalities and poverty, which are themselves risk factors for being a regular smoker. Moreover, long-term use of tobacco by households can give rise to intergenerational poverty. The proximal determinants of this were largely focused around capacity building of the individual or lack thereof. The school curriculum here only focuses on numeracy and literacy. This limits the delivery of culturally appropriate preventative health education, including that of the health risks of tobacco smoking, which has been shown to reduce the risk of tobacco use among individuals. Without having access to this education, young people here can't develop a sense of control and empowerment over their health, literacy, and health behaviours, which has a strong influence over their employment opportunities and potential income in the future. Just to conclude, I noticed a strong interconnectedness of the determinants which appear to perpetuate each other in both directions, thus highlighting the need for both to focus on the big picture in order to create change. Thanks.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Well
Any
done.
comments, Noor?
Kelly, just one quick comment. You just need, I may have missed it, but you just need a line on the bottom of the poster to say, for references, see page 2 or whatever.
Yeah.
I guess the statistic that I read up there in the corner, that from 1994 to 2018-19, it's gone up. Like the number of 18-year-olds smoking gone up.
And I would say that it's way higher in some of the remote communities that I work in. The statistics just aren't there. Yeah, because like the photos on the front were of that I have taken, like of that community, and yeah, there are some communities that I work with that are smaller or further away from Fitzroy Crossing, which is the town, and the smoking rates are just so high. So I think that's like not even like I had unpublished like data from the health service that I work at of like how high it is, but yeah, nothing that's published.
Frightening.
What's the cost of cigarettes up there? Is it high? Are they more expensive than they are in town?
I think it's like, I guess it depends if you buy a pouch or not, but it's like $50 for like a 25 pack, I think, or 30 pack. Yeah, it's way more expensive here.
And people are smoking that a day.
Yeah, and then some of the communities don't have the subsidies for their stores, so it's even more expensive. Or their community doesn't have a store, so they'd have the travel time coming in, and it's just okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Kelly?
What's your role up there, Kelly? What do you do?
So I work in a health promotion team at the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, and I work in a chronic illness team, but my specific role is in smoking cessation, so working in health promotion and also actual, smoking cessation of individual clients.
So a typical day in the life of Kelly at Fitzroy Crossing, what does that look like?
Like every day is so different, but at the moment I usually start like Mondays heading out to a community called Wonkajonka, which is about an hour and 20 minutes away from Fitzroy. I'd say that's one of the close ones. And I meet up with some of the remote area nurses, see if they have any new referrals for me, and then I go do house visits to clients that I have that are trying to quit smoking. Then I do some work with the chronic illness team that I work with, so that could be school visits or like community programs. It's every day is so different. This morning I got really dirty cleaning out a shed, and that was news.
And do you see any success with your stop smoking programs?
I've only just begun, so I've only been working here for 3 months.
Okay.
And the first month was like the whole Fitzroy was coming out of COVID lockdowns, but all the communities were still in lockdown, and they technically still are in lockdown. If you look at WA, like COVID stage guidelines, but most of us have special permission to still enter into the communities, so that's good. But yeah, so I don't. It's way too soon to know if I have any impact, but yeah.
Wow, we wish you well in that space, Kelly. You and Nerily up there in
Palm Island.
Yeah, the impacts I think are usually small, not big, and it's
I
to add all those small things up together.
Yeah, I'll take like lots of different things as a success, especially in the smoking cessation thing. It's like moving someone along the stages of change model. It's like
yes,
yeah. No, thank you. Thanks for sharing, Kelly. So we're up to the next Kelly now, and I'm going to share screen, and hopefully this will play. Tell us what yours is all about, Kelly, while I sort out sharing screen here.
So I decided to focus mine on binge eating disorder within Australian adolescents, which proved to be quite challenging but interesting at the same time. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's take it away. Hopefully everyone see that on big screen. Yep. Take that as a yes, because I can't see you.
Yep, that's fine.
My assignment, I focused on binge eating disorder within Australian adolescents. Now, binge eating disorder is characterised by repeated episodes of binge eating, consuming large amounts of food within a very short space of time, and there's often a feeling or a sense of loss of control in these moments. Now, it was added to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 2013. And as with many other eating disorders, it begins in adolescence. But interestingly enough, an Australian study tells us that Australian adolescents do not consider binge eating disorder to be a serious problem. Now, there are statistics and a diagnostic criteria below, but I want to bring your attention to the key determinants today. Starting off with our distal determinants, we are looking at gender, genetics, adverse childhood experiences such as childhood trauma. Society and media play a large part, projecting different ideals about body image and appearance, which can lead to binge eating disorder. Parents, caregivers, the people that we are raised by can also project different ideas about body image as well as different behaviours and attitudes too. Coming across to medial determinants, we've got friendships and peer groups that play a heavy role. Those that have a dissatisfaction and a preoccupation with body image are more susceptible to developing this disorder. Obesity can also be a risk factor and a marker. It can work both ways, but people who are obese and overweight are more susceptible to developing binge eating disorder. Those that have negative emotions and negative thinking patterns are more susceptible as well. And then we've got bulimia nervosa and anorexia nervosa, two other eating disorders that can also link into binge eating disorder down the track. Oftentimes there's comorbid conditions such as these psychiatric conditions here, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. These all show strong links into progressing further down into binge eating disorder. The proximal determinant is early restrictive dieting habits. So adolescents who show dieting habits early on in life are more susceptible to developing binge eating disorder later on in life. Because of the recent nature in diagnosis formally into the DSM, there is urgent calls for further longitudinal research in the area of binge eating disorder, particularly with Australian adolescents at this time. Binge eating disorder is not the final health disorder. Oftentimes, research tells us that binge eating disorder leads into osteoarthritis, high cholesterol, kidney issues, heart disease. And because of this, there is an urgent call from scientists and researchers to educate Australian adolescents on the seriousness of this disorder.
Excellent.
I don't like watching myself. I think I should have done it live.
That was really...
Yes. If you do it live, you don't have to watch yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very interesting though.
Well done, Kelly. Well done. Yeah.
There's a lot there. I think one of the things I was going to mention was because it's so recent, there's limited research in the area, and also due to the secretive nature of it. You know, it's it's something that's done a lot in private, so people aren't readily ready to admit to it. But yeah, it was very interesting to read about.
It sort of scared me in a way to be very aware of how I talk to my teenagers, and not just my daughter, because I guess it tends to be more prevalent in girls, but guys do suffer with the same thing.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, eating disorders, there's usually a big gender gap, and whilst binge eating disorder, there were more females, it was actually quite prevalent in males too.
Wow.
So,
because I definitely heard of numerous stories of younger girls, you know, whether it becoming anorexic or whatever, but often it stems back to comments made by whether it's parents or peers or whoever they are.
Yeah.
And really interesting.
Sometimes it's interesting. It seems, and some of the research I've read shows that in males it exhibits in slightly different ways. So excessive exercising, over-exercising is more prevalent in males than it is in females, but has a similar cause.
I think that's the difference between binge eating disorder. There's no compensatory behaviours. So when you've got bulimia, you binge eat a lot, but then you compensate with exercise, and you compensate, you know, by vomiting and things like that. Whereas, that's kind of what determines the difference there. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Really interesting. Thank you for sharing, Kelly.
Thank you.
So now, is it Katrina or Katerina? I feel like I've been saying it wrong. Can you clear it up for me?
It's Katerina.
Katerina. Okay, that's okay. I think that's what I've been saying. I thought, maybe I've got that totally wrong. Katerina. Lovely. So when you're ready, Katerina, feel free to share your screen and set yourself up, and go from there.
Nervous to go. Everyone's had really good.
You know what? You guys, you're doing awesome. You'll be.
It is
fine. I've actually just for the sake, I got a message from Matt. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing, but he can't make it tonight, so we'll have to get him to do it another time. Okay. Okay. So when yep, that's it.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
We can.
Katerina, excellent.
So go for it when you're ready, Katarina.
Okay. Well, evening, everyone. I'm going to be presenting on Indigenous Australian adults living in remote areas and cardiovascular disease, which is actually the leading cause of death in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So survey results from 2012 to 13 show that 1 in 4 adults have some form of CVD and are twice as likely to develop CVD compared to non-Indigenous Australians. The prevalence of this disease increases with age and tends to appear earlier and progress faster in the Indigenous population. Amongst those living in remote areas, it was noted that CVD is 1.4 times higher than non-remote areas. And I've just got a graph on the left here, and you can kind of see the more remote, the greater the prevalence of CVD on the left. So looking at the proximal determinants, poor diet is a major contributor to chronic disease such as CVD, and this is largely experienced by Indigenous Australians. Data collected from 2012 to 13 show that on average, daily intake of the 5 core food groups amongst Indigenous Australians in remote areas was considerably less than the respective recommendations. This graph on the right, you can see that the most servings is part of the discretionary food groups, and that includes foods that are low in nutrients, high in saturated fat, salt, sugar, or alcohol. And in remote communities, it was actually noted as being one of their main sources of energy. Daily tobacco use, another leading risk factor in CVD, as well as dyslipidemia, was found to have higher rates in remote Indigenous communities. Looking at the medial determinants, Marmot hypothesizes that if an individual was given good early development, education, and access to decent work, high rates of smoking and alcohol, which are both major risk factors in CVD, would be less of a problem. However, remote Australia has a lack of high schools, universities, employment opportunities, banks, and thriving market opportunities. And lastly, distal determinants. So forced resettlement in the 60s saw Indigenous communities being uprooted from their ancestral homes to a new environment, consuming foods higher in fat and not harvested from the wilds. This change to a Western lifestyle greatly increased the risk of developing CVD. Also, living in a remote environment has shown to inhibit health-promoting behaviors. There is limited access to good quality fresh fruit and vegetables, thus contributing to the poor health profile of Indigenous people. And primary healthcare, which is very important in preventing and managing chronic diseases. However, the use of primary care in Indigenous communities is much lower than expected. There are many factors that contribute to this. Some include inappropriate infrastructure, insufficient government funding, and healthcare professionals limited in knowledge to the distinct Indigenous culture within that particular community, and therefore they don't create a culturally safe environment. And that brings me to the end.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. Excellent. Anyone got some questions?
Katarina, just one comment on your poster and on the introduction, the 3rd paragraph. The prevalence of this disease increases with, and you've missed, I think age has been dropped off there.
Oh, I will fix that up.
You said it, but yes, I just noticed it wasn't on the poster.
Sorry. Okay.
And I guess one of the things you brought up as a distal determinant was the food security in terms of access to fruit and vegetables and in remote communities. I don't know, I'd love, you know, to comment more on that and from anyone that lives in a remote community, because that must be, I imagine for fruit and vegetables that are there, which is in very limited amounts, they would be much more expensive than what we are paying. Yeah.
I can definitely say that it's way more, food's so expensive here and it's not the best quality.
Food in general on palm is expensive, but fresh fruit and vegetables are subsidised by the government in part of the Close the Gap type of situations, and so they do subsidise the fresh stuff, and it's not outrageously more than other foods here, but we're close to Townsville. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how the classifications go with like a store getting the outback status, but some stores have the subsidies like that are about 2 hours away, but some that are about an hour away from Fitzroy, which is still remote in itself, aren't
Yeah, I mean,
subsidized, so it's even more expensive. Yeah, that's crazy.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Kelly. I'm trying to get ready for the next one. Give me a moment. All right. Sorry, I'll just share screen. And Jess, maybe you there, Jess? Where are you? Oh, is Jess not there? Okay. This one's by Jess, and I thought was she just there before, and she's just dropped out, has she? I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to share from Jess, and I think you'll find this one very interesting too. So just give me a moment. Hopefully everyone can see that. Can you see that, Paul? Just give me a.
yeah, that's
Yep. Okay, so let's play this one by Jess Bullivant.
The group that I'm looking at today in this poster are female sex workers from New South Wales, and the chronic disease I wanted to focus on is depression. Sex work is the provision of sexual services for money or its equivalent. I'm solely looking at female sex workers because they make up the majority of sex workers in New South Wales, and I wanted to look specifically at sex workers providing direct contact with clients rather than online services. Depression is a mood disorder that is characterised by persistent low mood, diminished interest and a loss of pleasure. So rates of severe depression are quite elevated in this community, and a 2005 study of 72 female sex workers in New South Wales indicated that around 50% experienced current depressive symptoms as well as a history of attempted suicide. So the proximal determinants that I identified in this group are injecting drug use, smoking and difficulty maintaining relationships. Injecting drug use was definitely quite prevalent in this group compared to the general population. And as with all of the determinants, it really impacted street-based sex workers quite a lot more than those working in brothels. In terms of medial determinants, I looked at victimisation at work and police focus. So in terms of victimisation at work, street-based and brothel workers are at a quite high risk, particularly if brothels haven't followed council approval, then they may not be maintaining certain standards or safety guidelines. In terms of police focus, although sex work is decriminalised in New South Wales, there's still evidence to suggest that police do target female street-based and brothel workers. A 2012 study indicated that of all the offences related to sex work, 60% of convictions were given to workers as opposed to clients. So workers are really being targeted as opposed to the clients who are using this service. Distal determinants I looked at were stigma and discrimination. So both stigma and discrimination have the potential to not only increase the symptoms of depression, but also to create a barrier to accessing help. Many individuals who had previous experiences of stigma when accessing mental health services indicated that they would be less likely to look for support again in the future. Also, in terms of discrimination, although research indicates that many workers have a history of experiencing violence at work, the majority did not report these incidents to police due to fear of poor treatment, harassment, or not being taken seriously. I can see how the impact of the distal determinants could be quite traumatic for individuals and may lead to the proximal determinants of injecting drug use, smoking, and difficulty maintaining relationships.
That's it. That's one. Okay. Any comments on that one? Unfortunately, Jess isn't here, but interesting that that 60 when the police are targeting them, that it's usually the sex workers that get into the trouble, not the people that are using that service.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, really interesting. Any other comments? Okay, well, just give me a second. I'm just going to go and get Jenny's with us. Jenny's not with us tonight, and she said she may not be able to make it, and she's sharing one about type 2 diabetes in Fiji. So just give me a moment and I'll go and get that one ready. Okay. Hopefully I've got the right one. So I'm just going to share screen again. Can you see that black screen?
Yep.
2, go. Diabetes in Fiji. Fiji has the world's highest ranking for diabetes mellitus mortality. Around 30% of the population have diabetes, with many more undiagnosed. And there is a high prevalence of preventable amputations due to delayed treatment. A systems approach, EGA style, is going to help show that there are disadvantages in different domains which reinforce one another. So the proximal determinants include undernutrition, inactivity, drugs, alcohol and tobacco. There's wide adoption of Western-style, cheap, readily available, energy-dense food in place of the healthier traditional diet. Inactivity, from the activities of daily living, traditional, to current sedentary lifestyle with everything ready to go and screen time. And tobacco, alcohol and drugs play a role in this once idyllic paradise. Stress, anxiety and depression are high, with expectations on young people particularly, academically, financially, employment to support the family and maintain traditional values, and a strong pressure to uphold honour, avoiding shame, which is difficult in a changing world. The ubiquitous internet and mobile phone have an impact there on health factors, and social inequity is particularly impactful. 40% poverty, wide gaps in services, especially health services, and a lack of personal power. And finally, the environment is very obesogenic, to quote Egger and Swinburne. The physical environment limits access to health services, with Fiji being isolated and remote, with so much water and little land, and proneness to natural disasters. The political environment, with colonisation, corruption, coups and lack of cohesion and cooperation, complicate things. The economic environment is very profit-driven, and advertising has pushed glamour and flashiness of imported foods, as well as problems of overcrowding in poverty areas and the cost of disaster recovery. And the socio-cultural environment has encouraged the belief that modern and imported foods, housing and lifestyle are superior. And in addition, the traditional diet favoured energy-dense food and is now replaced by refined food lacking in nutrition. Thank you for listening to this presentation on diabetes in Fiji, which is a massive concern.
Interesting one. Any comments? couldn't help thinking about when I went to Vanuatu, when she talked about the flashy Western packaged foods. And I spent some time up in Vanuatu a couple of years ago and went to visit the markets. I was in a place on Santo called Luganville, and we went to visit the markets, and there's this just massive and beautiful array of fresh food, fruits and vegetables, and mandarins and peanuts, and there was just all this beautiful looking food. And the people that were taking us around just said, well, what the people do is they come in from their villages and they sell their foods at the markets, and then with the money that they get from selling their fresh fruit and veggies at the markets, they go up the road to the shop that's owned by the Chinese, and they buy great big bags of white rice and quick, 2-minute noodles.
Noodles, yeah.
And there was empty packets of noodles all over the place. But yeah, I just thought, how sad. Here's this amazing array of food, and they believe that the Western packaged food is superior, and so they're selling this food and buying white rice and noodles, which have basically got no nutrition. So I guess what Jen shared was very similar across many of the Pacific Islands. Paul, you'll know much more because you've been there a lot more than I have. But,
yeah, there's no question about that, Mel. It's endemic across the Pacific Islands, and it's all driven by a profit motive. Maggie makes lots of money by selling noodles.
Yeah, interesting. Any other comments on the Pacific Islands or Fiji and type 2 diabetes? I must admit, all I can see is some very vivid images that a friend of Paul and mine, he's a surgeon from the Solomon Islands, and shows some very graphic images of, surgery out there, because a lot of what a surgeon does in the islands is literally amputating.
60% of the bed cases in the National Referral Hospital in Honiara in the Solomon Islands are diabetes related.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, isn't it?
And that's for a disease that was unheard of in the Solomon Islands in the 1970s. Yeah.
Very overwhelming. Well, we've come to our last one tonight, and Christabel, thank you for being so very patient to go lucky last. So feel free to share screen and set up whenever you're ready. You're right, finding that green button.
What happened? Can you see my screen or not yet?
Not yet. You just need to press on that. Can you see a green share screen button?
Share, yeah.
That's it.
Just hang on.
My points I can't see. Oh, it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming, I think. We can't see it yet either. Whoa.
Got it?
Yep. And so I'm not sure if you were here at the beginning. When it gets to 2.5 minutes, I just hold up a yellow card.
Okay.
And then when it gets to 3, I hold up a lovely pink card just to say time to wrap it up. So brilliant. So when you're ready to get going, feel free to start.
Well, I'll just apologize. I haven't had time to put it in a poster, but I've got all the points to do it.
That's all we need for tonight.
The poster's not due till Sunday.
Poster is Sunday.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My topic is on type 2 diabetes in the Indigenous Australians. And it's double the rate of the non-Indigenous Australians. So Indigenous has 7.9 and Australians have 4.9%. And it's the second leading cause of death, which one of the colleagues said, heart is the first leading cause of death in the Indigenous Australians. And there's no difference in gender, and it does start at a younger age because of the complexity of the proximal, medial, and distal determinants. So the nutrition, if you look at, there's 90% of Indigenous Australians who do not eat 2 fruits a day, and 40% of Indigenous Australians only eat 5 serves of veggies a day. 70% of Indigenous population at least has 1 serve of sugar sweetened drink, and 25% have it daily. And 70%, of Indigenous Australians are obese or overweight, and 40% do smoke. And with medial determinants, mental health is a high risk factor. 30% of them above age of 18 said they have high or very high level of psychological stress. And family separation, which we know started from colonization, has a very negative mental health risk factor. And with social inequality, with 32% of Indigenous Australians in 2006 completed year 12, and then in 2016 it went up to 47%. In the distal determinants, we've got physical and economical factors, and we find that 36% of Indigenous Australians own their home, and the remote areas, there's 3 times higher rate of living in overcrowded conditions. With wages in the Indigenous Australians, 52% of them depend on government assistance, 44% of them are employed for their income. With distal determinants, with the political environment, we all know social determinants, and because of colonization in 1788 till 2008, when the Close the Gap policy started, there was a lot of inequality or injustice at national, state and territory level, and in churches and institutes that affected mental, physical and social health. And there was inequality in health and resource distribution. With the social factors, the institutional racism, loss of land rights and resources, and incarceration. From young, they all suffered emotional, sexual, and physical abuse that had resulted in chronic health and behavioral issues for the last, I'd say, 2 decades. So, in conclusion, we can say proximal determinants is a major contributor to the cause of diabetes, and modifying these factors will lead to reversing diabetes. The medial and distal determinants fall under the social determinants of health and becomes a responsibility at community and government level. So for us to help reduce type 2 diabetes in the Indigenous Australians, we need to implement an individual and community-based culture-safe healthcare system to educate and implement a preventive lifestyle care, which is culture-safe to reduce all chronic diseases in the Indigenous Australians, not just diabetes. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know I could say we can implement CHIP.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christabel. And just when you're ready, just stop share.
Stop share, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Any questions for Christabel?
We actually published a paper looking at CHIP, the rollout of CHIP in Port Augusta and Druin, 2 Aboriginal communities, back in 2014, and saw a dramatic reduction in blood glucose levels over the period of the CHIP program. But yeah.
I know that I haven't put it in there, but the SMS, the medical appointments that Professor Edgar had started, it really works in that community base because they can all sit and talk together.
Oh, true.
Help, yes.
The group medical appointments.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
That really works. And I know I haven't put it in there, I've done the research. There is also increased community sort of going to see a GP. That has increased as well. But I know they still need more education and help there.
Interesting.
It will be in the post. It's just for presentation. I know it has to be short. So,
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Christabel, and thank you everybody for sharing. I think we've done really well tonight. Thank you so big clap to all of you.
Yeah,
and everyone's posters were really good.
They are. It's actually really good to us have a look at everyone's stuff. It's like, wow, amazing. Some real graphic designers in there.
Yeah, it's been a very, very informative evening.
Yeah.
Thanks for making it all work, Mel.
Well, it did work. Yay.
Yeah,
You need to have the internet go down too.
All flowed smoothly.
It did. That was really good. So let's we might stop recording, Paul, and then if anyone's got any questions, then we'll just quickly